I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight I invite you to wander through streets so foul that even the rats wore tiny crowns of filth, kings of waste and kingdoms of stench. Picture the winding alleys of medieval towns, narrow and slick with the runoff of daily life. No tidy drains, no hidden pipes, just streams of refuse drifting under your wooden clogs. Every breath carries the bite of rot and human waste. Why did people think the smell itself could kill them? Why did they believe that bad air, the dreaded miasma, brought death on its invisible wings? If a stroll through centuries of sewage sounds oddly soothing, you're in the right place. Slide your thumb over that like button. If you feel grim, curiosity deserves its own bedtime ritual. And maybe subscribe so next week we can wander somewhere equally rancid. If you're half listening while scrubbing your face clean tonight, tell me what's your favorite forgotten corner of history. Now tuck your feet away from imaginary gutter streams, because we're stepping straight into the filth together. You find yourself weaving through a cramped medieval lane. Overhead, precarious timbered houses lean forward, almost kissing each other across the filth. Below, gutters swell with a sludge of rainwater, kitchen scraps, and human waste tossed from upstairs windows. Chamber pots tip at dawn, sending last night's secrets splattering onto the cobblestones. No one apologizes. No one even blinks. A passing cartwheel splashes your ankles with something you'd rather not name. You glance around for a dry spot, there isn't one. Townsfolk trudge through it, daily boots caked in grime. Historians agree these streets were perfect breeding grounds for disease, but some scholars still debate how much of the plague spread came from filth alone and how much from the creatures it sheltered. You pause by a tanner's shed. The stink of urine-soaked hides blends with rotting vegetables from a nearby stall. A stray dog noses through the mess fleas leaping from its matted fur. You wonder how anyone survived these streets at all. Yet they did, sometimes miraculously, sometimes barely. A quirky detail drifts by medieval city ordinances did try to keep things tidy, sort of. Some towns had rakers' men paid to shovel muck into heaps, but these heaps just sat there until rain or wind carried them away, usually right into the nearest water source. Convenience over sanitation. You keep moving, drawn toward a noisy square where market stalls crowd the filth. Raw meat glistens on wooden boards. A butcher wipes his knife on an apron, already dark with stains. Flies gather like tiny mourners for an unwashed past. The air feels thick, almost alive. People believed this thick air-foul rank, heavy with decay, was the true villain. To them, disease floated on odors. Open a window light, some sweet-smelling herbs, maybe the deadly vapors would drift away. It made sense when you knew nothing of bacteria or fleas. You step around a pile of straw, meant to soak up leaks from the butcher's table. Some child leaps over it, bare feet smacking into the muck beyond. No soap waits at home, just the hope that a good breeze might cleanse what the town never would. These streets remind you the plague wasn't born in a single moment. It was brewed in centuries of casual filth and fearful guesses, a world where dirt and superstition held hands in the shadows. And tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, we'll follow that grime deeper into bathhouses that promised relief, but delivered something far more dangerous. Steam curls from a doorway just ahead, warm, inviting, almost hopeful. Tonight you slip inside one of medieval Europe's busiest secrets, the public bathhouse. A place where for a few coins, peasants and nobles alike could scrub off the streets. Or so they thought. You duck under a low lintel. Inside, a low hum of voices echoes off stone walls slick with condensation. Naked figures drift through mist, some gossiping, others lost in their own half-scrubbed thoughts. Wooden tubs cracked and stained brim with cloudy water. A servant ladles more steaming liquid from a blackened iron cauldron into each bath. You catch the scent, earthy, slightly sour, more swamp than spa. No soap floats here, just human heat and a faith that hot water alone could wash away the city's filth. Historians often note that medieval bathhouses were surprisingly social, like taverns without ale, though many sold that too. People came to bathe, relax, flirt, strike deals, or share secrets that drifted as easily as steam. Some scholars still debate whether these bathhouses truly offered health or merely stirred up new dangers with each swirl of tepid water. Near a corner, you spot two women leaning against the wooden ledge of a tub. One laughs behind a hand-eyes darting around to catch any wandering ears. Secrets thrive in this haze, just as germs do. Fleas and lice hitch rides from one damp body to the next, blissfully unaware of class or coin. A man in a frayed cap stands at a bench, scrubbing down a long wooden paddle used to stir the water. He plunges it back in. The swirl only mixes whatever clings to each bather, sweat oil, tiny parasites, into a warm communal soup. The irony bites at your sleep-fogged mind. People believe these rooms of vapor and chatter warded off disease. Yet the plague found perfect shelter here, moving effortlessly from back to back, neck to neck. Near the furnace, a boy fans coals to keep the water hot. His hands are pink and raw, his tunic damp with steam. You wonder if he ever bathes here too, or if the heat is all the cleansing he'll get tonight. A small detail, yet oddly comforting proof that for some warmth itself was the best medicine they could afford. Voices rise in the main chamber. Someone tells a tale of a neighbor's sudden fever, of black lumps under his arms, of how he staggered into the bathhouse, begging the steam to draw out his sickness. He died 2 days later. Some claim the bathhouse helped him. Others whisper it sealed his doom. Surviving records offer conflicting hints. No one fully agrees on how much blame these steamy sanctuaries deserved. A thin stream of water drips from a cracked clay pipe overhead, splashing onto the stone floor. It pools near your feet, carrying the bathhouse's secrets into the drainless underworld outside. You imagine the flow, joining the gutter rivers you just escaped, a never-ending cycle of filth that no bath can truly break. You sit for a moment on a low wooden bench, feeling the dampness soak your cloak. Around you, whispers bounce from wall to wall, weaving gossip with superstition. Bad air, bad neighbors, bad luck. Some patrons swear by extra hot baths to open their pores and release the poison within. Others fear too much. Bathing invites weakness, and worse, the attention of the plague's unseen hand. Through the steam, an elderly man hums as he ladles water over his thin shoulders. His eyes close. For him, at least, there is peace here. A fleeting comfort before he steps back into the rank streets beyond these sweating walls. As the mist thickens, you stand, brush stray droplets from your sleeve, and push open the warped wooden door. Outside, the cool night air hits your face like truth cleanliness. Here was always a dream, half lived and half lost. The real danger still scurries in the shadows on tiny legs and bristling backs. And that's where we're headed next, toward the true architects of plague that no amount of gossip and steam could drown. A flicker of movement catches your eye as you step from the bathhouse's drifting steam into the dark, rutted alley beyond. You lower your gaze, and there it is, the real master of medieval pestilence, scuttling between straw and scraps. A rat tail slick with gutter muck pauses just long enough for you to notice its twitching cargo. Fleas. So small you'd miss them, unless of course you were a scholar in hindsight, piecing together how plague's invisible couriers turned cities into graveyards. You follow the rat's path under a splintered barrel. You imagine the thousands of its kind nesting behind taverns, inside thatched roofs, under the floorboards of bustling homes. Some historians argue the black rat gets too much blame, that poor hygiene alone could have carried sickness far enough. But most agree the fleas riding these rodents were the real assassins, tiny vampires sipping infected blood, jumping from fur to flesh to fur again. A soft scrape makes you turn. Nearby, a cluster of stray cats slink along the wall, eyes flickering in the torchlight. They too hunt the rats, an unspoken pact between humans and felines. Keep the rodents down, keep the sickness down, or so they hoped. But when the plague hit hard, frightened townsfolk often killed cats, seeing them as witches' familiars or omens of doom. And with fewer cats came more rats, an irony that historians still shake their heads over. You step over a trail of spilled grain, spilled hope for some merchant whose shipment now feeds the squeaking underworld. A merchant's apprentice leans in a doorway, scratching at his wrist. He doesn't notice the flea that just made a quick leap from his sleeve to yours. Tiny, wingless, unstoppable. The people of the time didn't understand. They scrubbed, they soaked, they sniffed rosewater, and burned sweet herbs to chase away the bad air. But all along, the real danger perched at the edge of a straw mattress or nestled in a fur cloak. Some scholars wonder if early clues were missed: itching skin, sudden fevers, lumps beneath the arms. But without the magnifying glass of modern science, all they had were guesses and prayers. You drift down the alley toward the marketplace, where the day's trade has left more crumbs than coins. Rats dart between stalls like whispers of bad news. A baker sweeping flour dust from his doorstep doesn't even glance as a rat slips past his boot. It's just life filth was familiar rats were expected. The idea that they carried death on their spines was unthinkable. A dog barks from somewhere deep in the maze of lanes. You pause beside a barrel half full of rainwater and watch as a flea struggles on its surface, tiny legs paddling furiously. It won't drown. Most don't. They survive on skin, on warmth, on the lull of bodies packed close. Public bathhouse, royal court, peasant hovel fleas cared nothing for walls or class. A truth that made plague democracy's dark twin long before democracy had a name. A quirky footnote slips in as you walk in. Some towns, local folk believed wearing strong-smelling herbs in your shoes could keep fleas away. Rosemary, sage, lavender, bundled into slippers like a sweet-smelling armor. Did it work? Historians remain divided, though the fleas probably laughed their silent blood-sucking laugh. At the far end of the alley, you spot a ragged banner nailed to a tavern door. It warns travelers not to bring in bad humors. No rats on the sign, no fleas. Just the word filth, painted large like a talisman against the unseen. The irony is sharp. These words did nothing to stop the tiny empire of fleas thriving under the floorboards. You step back into the moonlight, shoes damp with gutter water. Behind you, the rat slips away to its next hiding place, unbothered by the human worries that trail behind it. Ahead lies another layer of medieval misunderstanding, the idea that warm water and fancy bathhouses were enough. Next, you'll learn why soap scarce as gold could have saved lives, but mostly left bathers stewing in more trouble than they ever imagined. A low wooden door creaks open ahead. Just another cramped cottage on a street that smells of wet wool and stale ale. Tonight, you slip inside to peek at something precious, by medieval standards, a battered wooden tub, half filled with lukewarm water. Here in the flicker of a single tallow candle, you see why soapless soaking was more curse than cure. A young maid drags a bucket across the floor, splashing more water into the tub. You watch the ripples catch candlelight turning brown where the dirt slides off her sleeves. No fragrant suds dance on the surface, only thin greasy films swirling in lazy circles. For most people, real soap was a luxury far out of reach. It required animal fat ashes and a tedious craft that turned common ingredients into something strangely precious. A bar of good soap could cost a week's wages, so people went without. Some families made their own harsh lye soap, but it left raw patches on skin and ate through clothes as eagerly as it scrubbed them. For many, it was simpler and cheaper to soak without it. Just warm water, sometimes mixed with a pinch of herbs or a handful of ashes if you were lucky. Historians still debate how widespread soap actually was in medieval homes. Surviving records speak of royal bath attendants and scented soaps for nobles but ordinary villagers. A rag and water would do. The maid steps into the tub, dress hitched to her knees. She scrubs at her arms with the edge of her sleeve, the same sleeve that dusted flour wiped spills and carried dirt from stable to kitchen. It's not so much a bath as a simmer one body marinating in days of toil. She closes her eyes and hums steam, drifting up to soften the soot-stained rafters. For a moment, the water feels like a small mercy. You shift your gaze to the corner, where an older man crouches by the hearth. He's tending a pot of water, careful not to let it boil. Too much waste of fuel, they'd say. Water hot enough to warm the bones, but not so hot as to burn precious firewood. Fuel cost silver. Better to soak just warm enough to pretend you're clean. In some towns, communal bathhouses offered stews like this on a larger scale. Dozens soaking together, half believing the warmth would draw out bad humors. But as you've already glimpsed, the only thing shared more generously than warmth was other people's grime. A quirky detail flickers in your mind. Some medieval bathers carried small cloths scented with herbs, pressing them over mouths and noses to filter the bad air rising from the water. No soap for the skin, but a perfumed scrap to keep the stench away from tender nostrils. There's no scholarly consensus on whether this did anything but offer fleeting comfort. The maid stands water dripping from her hem. She steps out onto the rush-strewn floor, shivers, then dries off with a cloth stiff with old stains. This rag might serve the next bather too. Her father may be a sibling, each hoping to shed a layer of filth in the same tired tub. You glance at the water one last time. Its surface is slick, now reflecting the faint glow of the guttering candle. You imagine how many diseases might cling to that warmth, how quickly a single sick body could turn a simple soak into a quiet invitation for plague to thrive. She tosses the rag into a corner, wraps a shawl around her shoulders, and banks the fire for the night. For a fleeting moment, you think of the modern comforts you'll return to: hot showers, scented soaps, lined up in neat rows. But here, in this dim cottage, the closest thing to soap is the memory of it. Outside, the wind rattles the shutter. You slip back into the lane, your mind swirling, like the bathwater you just left behind. Next, you'll follow the trail of scents. People clung to rosewater and herbs hope bottled in perfume, promising to mask death with sweetness. Step into a narrow chamber, lit by a single beeswax candle, its flame dancing shadows across cracked plaster walls. Here, in this tiny corner of a plague-riddled town, you discover how desperate noses turn to roses, how people believe perfume could stand guard where soap and sewers had failed. A merchant's wife stands before a chipped mirror. She dips a ragged cloth into a small corked vial. The scent that escapes sweet cloying tinged with something sharp fills the air in seconds, battling the sour smell of damp rushes underfoot. She dabs rosewater behind her ears, at her wrists, along her collar. To her, this ritual isn't mere vanity. It's a shield against invisible death, drifting on foul breezes. In medieval minds, the nose was a gatekeeper. If bad air, the dreaded miasma, carried sickness, then sweet air might repel it. Scholars still puzzle over how deep this belief ran. Some records speak of rosewater doused on doorsteps, lavender bundles tucked into sleeves, pomanders stuffed with cloves, and ambergris swinging from velvet cords. A heavy knock rattles the door. A young boy appears nose red from the night wind. He carries a sprig of rosemary, tied with twine payment, from a neighbor, too poor for coin, but eager for a sniff of salvation. The wife dips the sprig into her rosewater, hands it back. He presses it to his face, inhales deeply, then scampers off to deliver it to his mother's sickbed. The smell promises comfort, maybe even hope, though neither can cure the lumps that rise beneath the skin when plague calls. In the corner, a small brazier hisses with embers. A twist of dried herbs smolders on its great sage, time a few scraps of mint. The smoke curls through the cramped room, clinging to curtains to the woman's hair. She believes it purifies the air, scours away the poison the streets push under the door. Historians argue whether this simple act did anything at all. Some say it offered a fragment of truth that burning certain herbs might deter fleas. Others scoff, pointing to the relentless roll of plague carts through streets perfumed yet still rank with death. The merchant's wife picks up a small pewter flask shaped like a teardrop. She holds it to the candlelight, watches the liquid inside catch gold. Imported from Damascus, her husband claimed worth more than her fur-lined cloak. She saves this rosewater for special days, for visitors she wants to impress, or plague days she wants to outwit. A quirky detail flickers to mind in wealthier houses. People soaked handkerchiefs in rosewater, pressing them to their lips when they walked through crowded alleys. It was part fashion, part survival charm. The truly cautious stuffed herbs into the linings of their hats, hoping every breath passed through gardens of rosemary and rue before slipping into their lungs. You lean against the rough wall, breathing in the mingled scents of rose and smoke. It's oddly calming, this futile war of sweet against sick. Outside, the wind rattles the shutter, carrying the city's raw stench right up to the door. The merchant's wife barely notices. She dips her cloth again, dabs her neck. Tomorrow she might do the same, assuming tomorrow comes at all. Somewhere deeper in the city church, bells toll, muffled by distance and damp air. You picture neighbors sniffing pomanders as the procession passes, clinging to the belief that sweet scents could fence out the reaper's touch. The flame gutters. She snuffs it with a pinch, wraps her shawl tight, and settles by the brazier. The rose water clings to her skin long after the candle's glow fades, a fragile perfume fortress against the truth waiting in every rat-infested street. Tonight, the scent holds. But tomorrow, when the doctor knocks in his beaked mask, no rose will hide the smell of sickness. And so, you follow the trail from sweet masks to stranger masks. Next, you'll stand face to face with the bird-like guardians of plague time dread. A hollow echo of footsteps draws you away from rosewater dreams and back onto the cobblestones, where a figure looms through the swirling dusk, half man, half omen. Tonight, you stand before the beak-masked watchers of the plague medieval doctors who looked more like walking nightmares than healers. He pauses under a flickering lantern. Leather gloves creak as he adjusts the heavy cloak draped over his shoulders. A wide-brimmed hat sits low, shadowing eyes you'll never really see. But it's the mask. Oh, the mask that snatches your breath. Long, curved, sharp as a raven's profile. Stuffed deep in that hollow beak is his arsenal of defense-dried rose petals, lavender cloves mint, maybe a dash of camphor. He believes this bouquet of herbs filters the poisoned air, trapping the miasma before it claws into his lungs. A soft rattle comes as he moves a pouch of dried herbs, knocking against a vial of vinegar. His boots splash through the gutter's ooze. Each step marks a home where death lingers behind bolted doors and curtained windows. Some scholars say the mask was more for morale than medicine, a costume of courage when real cures were scarce. Others argue it offered a thin sliver of protection against foul smells and by sheer luck, maybe the fleas. You trail him at a careful distance. He pauses by a door, painted with a crude red cross. A family inside waits breathless, hoping the man behind the bird's face brings relief, not confirmation of the worst. He lifts his staff more wand than walking stick, tapping softly on the planked wood. Some towns paid these doctors handsomely. Others forced them into service, hoping they'd chase the plague away with their eerie presence alone. A window cracks open above. A child peers down, face pale as the moon. The doctor doesn't look up, just steps inside the mask's beak, leading the way. For a moment, you stand alone on the street, imagining what happens next. A quick check of lumps and sores, a scribbled note of garlic poultices or vinegar washes, cures that rarely cured. The mask watches all expression frozen in its hollow gaze. A quirky note floats through history's pages. Some doctors lined their masks with sponges soaked in wine, believing the damp sponge caught sickness. Others stitched the beak with scraps of linen dipped in camphor oil. There is no scholarly consensus on whether these odd tricks did anything at all. Some claim they offered token protection. Others say it was wishful theater. The door creaks again. The doctor emerges, eyes hidden behind round glass. He wipes his gloves on his cloak. A soft clink as he drops a sprig of rosemary onto the doorstep, a sign that the plague lives here now. He moves on shoulders, hunched under the weight of superstition and hopeless remedies. You watch him vanish into a misty lane, a strange phantom drifting through history's worst nightmare. For all the mask's horror, it gave people hope. To see a figure, any figure walking through death's alleys, meant someone still cared enough to stand guard. Even if that guard carried nothing more than scented herbs and grim resolve. You turn away, nose prickling at the sharp sweetness left in his wake. For a moment, you imagine the weight of that beak pressing down the sweat, trapped inside the stifling smell of wilted herbs. Comfort or prison? Maybe both. A dog barks in the distance. You press on, winding deeper into the lanes where filth and fear never sleep. Next, you'll step behind the palace walls to discover that even kings and queens weren't immune to the plague's clever reach, and that royalty's bathwater held secrets of its own. Slip through a carved wooden gate and into a courtyard so still you almost forget the rancid city beyond. Tonight, you stand at the edge of privilege, where rose-scented sachets and gilded basins promised kings and queens a clean life, untouched by common grime. But as you'll see, royal hygiene in plague time was a paradox drenched in lavender and denial. A servant scurries past, balancing a brass basin, sloshing with tepid water. The scent of crushed herbs drifts behind him. Mint, maybe sage, meant more to please royal noses than to cleanse royal skin. In the far chamber, a fire crackles low. Here, you find Henry IV of England, or at least the ghost of his royal bath ritual once a year. If the records don't exaggerate, the king would lower himself into a carved wooden tub, while courtiers fussed with linen cloths and fragrant oils. He preferred lavender sachets, sewn into his doublets, pressed between clean shirts, stacked high in oaken chests. When he walked the stone corridors of his drafty palace, people smelled herbs and rose petals, not the truth beneath the velvet and ermine. Historians differ on the frequency of these regal soaks. Some accounts insist medieval monarchs bathed only a handful of times a year. Others whisper of secret royal bathhouses where steam rose behind heavy curtains. The truth may float somewhere in the middle, privacy luxury and the stubborn belief that too much bathing might weaken a king's humors. You watch a maid dip a length of linen into a pewter bowl. She lifts it, dripping to dab at the neck of her noble charge. No scrubbing, just a perfumed pat-down that left more fragrance than cleanliness behind. In corners of royal chambers, lavender bundles fought a losing battle against lice that crawled through seams and fur trim. A single sachet of dried flowers might make a crown smell sweet, but it didn't drown the scratching that royal fingers hid under embroidered cuffs. A quirky note, some noblemen wore small lockets of civet musk essence scraped from a wild cat's scent glands, believing its pungent bite overwhelmed the plague's lethal airs. Scholars still squabble over how often these aromatic charms actually worked. They did mask the smell, at least, which was sometimes half the battle in a palace where a single infected courtier could send a plague rumor ricocheting through marble halls. Step softly through a private corridor, and you'll find a copper tub tucked away like a secret. Once filled, it was never drained. Easily, water hauled in by bucket, heated over crackling hearths, then left to cool, stale and still. Servants might reuse it for the next bath or stand guard with fresh towels while the king lingered in his scented soak. A knock at the chamber door interrupts the hush. A physician enters, eyes flicking toward the tub. He bows low, mumbles something about humors and vapors, and slips a sprig of rosemary onto a side table. He believes, or pretends to believe, that the herbs will protect the king's lungs from the bad air swirling beyond castle gates. Some say these doctors warned royal patrons not to bathe too often, fearing it opened pores to poisonous winds. There's no scholarly consensus on how strong this superstition was, but many a king died clean-scented yet filthy beneath his silks. You lean against a carved post, watching candles gutter low. Royalty might have had silks and sachets, but the fleas found them anyway. No silk hem could keep a parasite from its meal. And when plague crept into these stone walls, no lavender bundle could chase it back out. The crackle of the fire softens. The maid dips the cloth again, wrings it out, pats the royal brow. Lavender lingers in the air, masking the truth that no crown could buy real safety, not when rats scuttled behind the wainscoting and fleas dreamed beneath golden quilts. Beyond the chamber door, the palace hums with gossip tales of nobles who swear by their scented charms while filth scuttles at their feet. Step back through that hush for next. You'll find yourself in a far less gilded chamber, the communal bathhouses where towels were shared. Secret spread and plague found easy passage from neck to neck. slip out of the palace's lavender haze and back into the humbler heart of medieval life, where soapless soaking was one thing, but the towels that followed were quite another. Tonight, you press your shoulder against the door of a bustling public bathhouse, where warm air clings to damp stone, and the simple cloth you dry yourself with might just carry your neighbor's secrets and their sickness too. Inside the scene is thick with steam and chatter. Bathers recline in rows of wooden tubs, the water lukewarm and milky from countless rinses of skin and sweat. On a wide bench near the fire pit, piles of linen towels wait neatly folded at least at first glance. You see a young apprentice roll one between calloused hands, pass it to a woman climbing out of the tub. She wraps it tight around her shoulders, rubs briskly, then tosses it back onto the pile when she's done. Another bather snatches it up without a second thought. For a moment, you try not to imagine what lingers in those threads. Fleas, shaken loose lice, clinging stubbornly, tiny skin flakes carrying the day's grime forward to the next unwitting neck. Historians note that in many towns, communal towels were considered a small luxury. They were better than air drying in a cold draft, or worse, heading home dripping wet through muddy lanes. Some bathhouses provided these cloths for free. Others charged a coin for each rub-down, which meant families often shared one towel among several siblings or neighbors. The economics of plague had a peculiar logic. What you saved in soap and cloth you paid in sickness. A man in the corner hawks his own special towels, coarse flax dyed a murky blue, sprinkled with a pinch of dried herbs. He swears the scent wards off foul airs. Customers believe him because they want to pressing the scratchy fabric to their faces as if rosemary threads alone could keep death at bay. Some scholars remain divided on whether these herbal cloths offered any real defense or merely perfumed illusions. You watch as a pair of friends chat in a half-empty tub, elbows resting on the rim, voices low but warm with shared gossip. One climbs out, dripping and shivering. He reaches for a towel hanging on a hook, the same one his friend used minutes before. He wipes his hair, his shoulders, his neck, unaware that every sweep might pass on more than warmth. A soft irony hums through this steam. The thing meant to finish cleansing the body might be the thing that invites plague back in. A quirky footnote drifts into your thoughts. In some bathhouses, attendants beat damp towels against hot stones before passing them on, hoping the heat would dry and purify the linen. Maybe it killed a few lice. Maybe it didn't. Surviving records offer no agreement, only rumors of heated cloths and scalded fingertips. A bathhouse maid drapes fresh towels onto a long rail near the stove. She pauses, scratches at her wrist, then wipes her nose with the same cloth she'll hand out next. No one notices, or if they do, they don't speak. In a world where filth was unavoidable, a reused towel felt like a small price for fleeting warmth. The chatter grows louder as more bathers filter in from the street, eager to wash off market dust street stench and fear. They slip into tubs, lean back into misty haze, and trust that the towel waiting on the hook will keep them safe and dry. It's a fragile trust one that parasites and plague have little respect for. You step back into the cooler corridor, a damp draft curling around your ankles. Behind you, the bench stacked with communal cloths stands ready for the next customer, each square of linen a quiet bridge for invisible invaders. Outside, the air feels raw but honest, no scented illusions, no false warmth. Ahead, you hear distant bells and soft chanting. Next, you'll follow the trail to a quieter place, where monks dipped their hands in holy water, hoping faith would wash away what soap and towels could not. Step softly now. Let the echo of dripping bathhouse water fade behind you as you cross the threshold of a monastery courtyard. Here in the hush of stone cloisters and candlelit chapels, you find a different kind of cleansing one that promised to wash filth from the soul, and perhaps from the skin too. Welcome to the world of holy water and fragile hope. A monk in a coarse brown habit shuffles down a flagstone path, sandals whispering against moss. He carries a shallow brass bowl, brimming with water drawn from a well the brothers claim is blessed. He pauses at a small fountain, dips his fingers, then flicks droplets onto a carved stone basin where novices kneel scrubbing their hands and forearms under the monk's watchful eye. The air is scented faintly, with rosemary sprigs floating on the water's surface, a nod to both faith and the lingering dread of foul air. In medieval monastic life, bathing was not just about dirt. It was a ritual wrapped in belief. Water, especially water touched by holy words, could purge sins and sickness alike. Some abbeys built simple bathhouses for the brethren, narrow chambers, where novices washed feet and faces before vespers. But full-body baths, those were rare, reserved for high feasts or moments of crisis. Historians still debate how strict these rules really were. Some argue monks were cleaner than townsfolk, others that a single basin shared by dozens did more harm than good. You follow the monk into a shadowed hallway where buckets line the wall. Some are warm, perfumed with crushed mint and lavender gifts from the herb garden tended just beyond the cloister gate. A novice dips a rag, and one wipes the stone floor where muddy footprints lead away from morning prayers. The same rag returns to the bucket, darkening the water with each swipe. A soft chant rises from the chapel, nearby voices layered in Latin, echoing through rafters heavy with candle soot. In one corner of the hall, a wooden bench holds a row of simple washing bowls. A single towel hangs on a peg above them, washed once a week maybe. Monks dip hands, rinse faces pat dry with the same linen. A holy habit repeated every dawn and dusk. A quirky detail drifts through your mind. Some monastic orders believed that too much washing tempted vanity. Others feared warm baths weakened the spirit, made the body soft and sin-prone. There's no scholarly consensus on which orders bathed most or least, but surviving records hint at rules about moderate cleanliness, clean enough for prayer, but never so clean that it smelled of luxury. You pass through an open archway into the herb garden, the earth damp with morning dew. Rows of sage and mint bristle in tidy beds. Monks clip sprigs to drop into holy water basins, hoping the sharp scents might chase bad humors away before they cross the cloister walls. Did it work? Some scholars claim the herbs kept fleas at bay. Others suspect the brothers just liked the smell. In the corner of the garden, an old monk bends over a cracked tub half full of rainwater. He dips his sleeves and scrubs at stains the color of ink and wax. No soap bubbles rise, only ripples of cloudy water that spill onto the flagstones, seeping back into the thirsty earth. He hums a hymn under his breath, lost in the hush of a ritual older than any plague. You stand there, watching the droplets cling to his rough-spun robe, watching how they carry more hope than hygiene. For a moment, you wonder if he believes the holy water wards off death better than any doctor's beak or rosewater scent. Maybe in these walls it does. Maybe the faith that clings to stone and chant in herb gardens does more to calm the mind than the body ever could. As you step back toward the cloister gate, the chant fades behind you. The world beyond waits rank and restless, its filth untouched by prayer alone. Ahead, you'll drift into stranger cures, still where learned men insisted daily baths drained your strength and invited the plague in turning simple washing into dangerous folly. Slip out of the monastery's cool shadows and back onto a crooked lane where the sharp scent of herbs fades, replaced by the raw stink of reality. Here, under the lean-tos of plague-time apothecaries and makeshift consulting rooms, you find yourself eavesdropping on men who claim to know better doctors and barber surgeons, whose strange medical wisdom turned soap and water into suspicious threats. A flickering lantern swings above a small timber shop. Its sign, a crudely painted pestle and mortar, marks the place where a self-taught physician holds court. You peer inside through a half-open door. The smell hits first vinegar, garlic, burnt feathers, and something sweet rotting under the counter. A young man sits on a three-legged stool shirt, off back bent, while the doctor pokes at lumps under his arm with a copper rod. Too many baths, the doctor mutters voice gravelly with self-importance. Opens the pores. Weakens the humors. Invites bad air to seep in. He dips a rag in vinegar, dabs the sores, then ties a linen wrap around the patient's neck. For him, water is as dangerous as any rat or flea, at least in excess. Some physicians insisted a little filth made the skin stronger, sealed tight against pestilence. You slip inside unnoticed and lean against a wall stacked with dusty scrolls. There you catch scraps of whispered advice traded like coin among the sick. Don't wash too often. Don't soak too long. Don't let warm water melt your strength. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or convenient excuse in places where soap was rare and clean water costly. Some scholars find old treatises warning that the plague thrived on moist skin, left vulnerable by baths. Others suspect it was simply easier to blame water than to understand invisible fleas. The doctor unwraps a bundle of herbs, sage, marjoram, mustard seed. He grinds them into a poultice with rough hands. Rub this under the arms, on the feet. Sleep warm. No washing tomorrow. The patient nods, eyes wide. Fear makes every odd cure seem worth trying, even if it means staying dirty a day longer. A quirky footnote flickers through your mind. One medieval cure suggested shaving a live chicken and strapping it to the plague-swelling feathers facing inward to draw out the poison. Some healers swore by crushed emeralds dissolved in wine. Others by onions stuffed under pillows. Daily baths. Foolishness. They'd hiss, "Why wash away your natural defense?" You watch the doctor clean his hands, not with water, but with a scrap of linen doused in sharp-smelling spirits. He rubs until his skin goes pink, then moves to the next patient, a pale girl wrapped in blankets, eyes sunken but hopeful. He repeats his warning, too clean, too weak. Let the body's humors do their work. No baths tonight. Outside the shop, an old woman sells charms against overwashing. Tiny cloth bags filled with camphor and wormwood worn on cords around the neck. She presses one into a mother's hand, promises it will keep her children strong. It smells harsh and bitter. The mother lifts it to her nose, inhales, and nods. Better than soap and scalding water, she thinks. Better than nothing. You follow the lantern's dim glow out into the street. A narrow drainage ditch cuts through the mud at your feet. Somewhere in the darkness, you hear the soft trickle of wastewater mixing with the city's filth. No one worries about its cleansing power, only that it carries the scent of death if the wind shifts wrong. A passing beggar scratches at his ribs, muttering to himself about a neighbor who bathed too often and never woke up again. Did it happen? Surviving records don't agree. Some say these tales were cautionary fables for people who couldn't afford baths anyway. A rumor turns self-fulfilling fear. You pull your cloak tighter, mind drifting toward the next village, where no fancy physician sets rules about water. There you'll find peasants who scrub quick in icy rivers, trusting only nature's chill to rinse away what fancy doctors fear so much. The chill hits you first, a slap of wind and river mist that wipes the stale vinegar and herb-scented air from your memory. You stand now at the edge of a peasant village, far from royal courtyards, and learned doctors far from bathhouses brimming with gossip and steam. Here the bath is whatever nature offers: an icy brook, a bend in the river, a bucket brimming with rainwater tipped over a bowed head. You watch a boy run barefoot across frost-hardened grass, shirt half untucked, hair matted with sleep. He carries a wooden pail, splashing water over a stone basin as his mother scolds him gently for wasting precious drops. There's no fire-heated tub here, no linen towel steeped in lavender. If you're lucky, you dunk a rag in the river, scrub your face, rinse your feet, and call it done before your skin turns blue. Beside the stream, a girl kneels on a flat rock, sleeves rolled to elbows, scrubbing at her forearms with handfuls of wet moss. The water swirls dark with mud and ash. She glances over her shoulder when you draw closer, but says nothing, just dips her hands again and lets the current carry her dirt downstream. Some scholars argue that peasant folk were filthier than townspeople, but records hint they washed more than nobles, thought just not with soap or scented oils. A quick plunge, a rough scrape, with river reeds as shake in the wind done. Nearby, a toothless elder lowers himself into the shallows, gasping at the shock. He laughs through chattering teeth, half misery, half pride. Cold keeps the body strong, he insists to anyone listening. Warm baths are for soft folk in cities where plague sneaks in through open pores. Here, the river's chill might bite your bones, but it scares off sickness too. At least that's the hope whispered from mother to daughter, grandfather to grandson. A quirky detail flickers into the scene in some regions. Villagers bathed at night, under moonlight, believing spirits of clean water were stronger in darkness. Surviving songs hint at folk rituals where women waded waist-deep singing charms to bless the river and themselves. Some scholars dismiss these tales as folklore embroidered over centuries. Others swear by the truth, hidden in scraps of parish records. You kneel by the bank trail, your fingers through the freezing flow. There's no soap here, only the raw scrub of grit and cold. A young man trudges down the path, shoulders burdened with a yoke of empty buckets. He nods at you, then squats to rinse his neck. His skin blooms pink, where the river strikes stinging, but clean, if only for a moment. He splashes his face twice, gasps, then stands. One quick baptism against centuries of filth. A mother calls her children in from the bank, scolding them for lingering too long. They shake their wet hands at each other, giggling despite purple lips. No fancy doctor told them how to wash. No beaked mask ever knocked on their door. They knew only what they saw. Dirt needs water. Cold bites harder than sickness if you stay out too long. And yet even here, lice hide in straw beds, fleas hop from sheep to skin. Clean feet mean little when the mattress writhes at night. A hollow church bell tolls from the hill above the cottages. Someone died, maybe of plague, maybe just of winter's grip. You watch the family trudge back to their thatched cottage, damp hair plastered to foreheads. Tomorrow, they'll do it again. Scrub quick, shiver hope. As you stand, The wind picks up rattling bare branches overhead. The river hums on its slow journey to the next village, carrying whispers of soapless scrubs and half-clean skins. From here, your path winds back indoors, to where even the cleanest bodies lay their heads in filth they couldn't wash away bedding. So dirty, it made every bath a lost cause. Step away from the river's bite and into the low hum of a peasant cottage at dusk, where the warmth you first crave soon reveals its hidden filth. Tonight, you stand at the foot of a straw-filled pallet crude bedding that promised comfort but often carried a cargo of tiny, relentless bedmates. A mother stoops beside a wooden frame, tugging a rough blanket over straw that crunches beneath her knuckles. She pauses, lifts a handful of the stuffing, and shakes it gently. Bits of dry stalks fall like brittle confetti onto the packed earth floor. Within the straw, you spot them, if you dare, small specks that skitter when disturbed, hungry shadows waiting for a body's warmth. For the medieval poor fresh bedding meant gathering straw from a nearby field, spreading it in a frame, and hoping it lasted through cold nights and colder seasons. But as weeks passed, the straw broke down into soft dust, the perfect playground for lice fleas and other visitors with 6 legs and no sense of decorum. Some families layered herbs in the mix lavender, wormwood, rosemary to chase the crawlers away. Scholars still debate if it helped. Most agree it smelled nicer at least. A father shuffles in from the door boots, shedding dried mud. He unlatches his belt, tosses his wool tunic across a stool. No bath tonight, just a quick rinse at the bucket by the hearth and a hopeful scratch behind the ear. He lowers himself onto the straw mattress, grimacing as something tickles his calf. He thumps the bedding once, twice. The creatures scatter for now, but never vanish. Nearby, a child wriggles under a frayed blanket, cheeks flushed from river scrubbing earlier. Whatever chill the icy wash chased off is back now, gnawing at toes and fingers. He pulls the blanket tight, oblivious to the tiny army regrouping in the straw beneath. A single louse could undo an hour in the cold river. And where one thrives, dozens follow. A quirky detail drifts into this hush. In some villages, families burned old straw at the start of spring. They called it bed cleansing, a ritual that scattered pests, at least for a week or two, until fresh straw invited them back. Some records hint at folk beliefs that straw bedding should never be moved under moonlight, lest spirits of sickness settle into the gaps. Historians disagree whether this was fear or superstition spun from the all-too-real horror of finding a bed alive with fleas. You move closer to the hearth. Flames flicker over the child's face, highlighting the scratch marks at his neck, the faint red lines at his wrists. They'll heal, maybe. Or they'll fester if plague-bearing fleas slip in through a tear in the thatch roof and drop onto a resting arm. Clean water means little when bedding is a breeding ground no soap can reach. The mother sighs as she pulls another rough blanket over her husband's legs. She fingers a sprig of dried lavender tucked into the straw by the pillow. It masks the smell, for now old sweat, damp straw, the earthy bite of last year's harvest, turned to a restless nest. A soft knock on the shutter startles her. A neighbor may be asking after a cough, a fever the newest rumor of plague in the next hamlet over. She hushes the child, presses him deeper into the straw. They believe that warmth might keep death away. They believe that prayers tucked under the blanket edge might fend off what soap and scrubbing cannot. You step back toward the door as the fire crackles lower. The bedmates settle hidden in the hush of sleep. Dirt finds its way back to clean skin every night, riding the spines of straw and the hum of breath in cramped rooms. Outside, The wind carries whispers of a city that knew these same secrets, but on a grander, fouler scale, where poor sanitation turned streets into open graves. Next, you'll stand at the edge of Parisian plague pits, where the legacy of filth piled deeper than any straw bed. Step from the low warmth of that peasant hut into the cold weight of stone and mud that marks the edge of medieval Paris, where no lavender sachet or cold river could wash away what filth had already claimed. Here beneath crooked rooftops and weeping rain gutters, you stand before the city's hidden shame plague, pits yawning beneath the cobblestones, waiting to swallow the cost of centuries of neglect. You drift down a narrow Parisian lane, boots squelching through ankle-deep muck. Rivulets of waste twist around your soles, kitchen scraps, animal offal, whatever chamber pots surrendered hours before. The city's alleys run like open sewers, sending everything toward low points where the air grows thick and stagnant. In the distance, the cathedral's bells toll solemn, echoing off damp walls as if blessing the living and the buried all at once. A cart creaks past wheels shuddering through the slurry. Atop the wooden bed lie shapes covered in rough cloth lumps, too still to be mistaken for sacks of grain. The driver flicks his reins, head bowed low against the drizzle. A boy trots alongside shovel resting on one shoulder. They're bound for the edge of town, toward a trench wide enough to hold dozens, maybe hundreds. Historians tell us that in plague years, Paris strained under the weight of its own dead. Burial grounds overflowed until they spilled into hastily dug pits in churchyards and vacant lots. Some scholars argue these pits were lined with lime to slow decay and dampen the stink. Others insist the city's graveyards were so packed that bones surfaced with each new rain, washing memories of the plague's cruelty right into the muddy streets. You follow the cart, the hush of footsteps broken only by the soft scrape of the shovel's iron tip against a cobblestone corner. A priest in a thin cloak stands near the pit's edge, murmuring prayers that drift into the chill air like breath made visible. He carries a censer, its faint sweetness of incense swallowed by the smell of damp earth and rot. A last kindness for the nameless beneath the cloth. Nearby, a young woman clutches a bundle wrapped in linen. Her eyes are dry, tears cost water she doesn't have to spare. She watches the shovel move the cloth-covered shapes lower into the pit. Tomorrow, she'll scrub her doorstep, sprinkle rosewater near the lintel, maybe burn a handful of sage. But she knows, like every Parisian knows, that once filth seeps in, no ritual truly keeps it out. A quirky note lingers here. Some burials came with strange, half-forgotten rites. Records whisper of candles stuck in loaves of bread and lowered into the pit alongside the bodies, offerings meant to feed lost souls or distract evil spirits. Scholars remain divided whether this was superstition or simple comfort for those left behind. Your eyes trace the rows of shovels leaning against a half-collapsed shed. The gravediggers work quick, glancing at the sky for more rain, for more reason to hurry the job. They wrap scarves around mouths and noses, hoping the thick air won't carry plague back up from the soil. Some say the very pits became breeding grounds for rats and fleas when the city failed to bury its secrets deep enough. You step back as the last cloth bundle drops from the cart landing with a muted thud that trembles up through your boots. The driver lifts his hat, mutters a word you can't quite hear. The boy with the shovel meets your eyes for a heartbeat, then turns away, digging in silence as the pit swallows his day's work. In the distance, Paris breathes on carriages rattling over bridges, market stalls brimming with gossip, Noble halls fretting over rosewater and sachets, while the real battle festers beneath their feet. This city of light and filth learned too late that plague does not care for stone walls or fancy titles. It seeps through gutters, crawls into beds, and waits for the next careless age. Step back from the open pit. Feel the mud cling to your soles as you drift toward one final twist in this story, how for some filth itself became armor. Next, you'll meet those who embrace their stink as a shield, believing that a strong reek might just keep death's breath away. Leave the pits behind now, the soft squelch of mud underfoot, replaced by the stale hush of an alley where filth is no accident, it's a strategy. Here, at the frayed edges of plague-time Europe, you meet the stubborn souls who believed that the worse they smelled, the safer they'd be. This is survival by stink. A gaunt man crouches by a cracked wall, tugging a threadbare cloak tight around his ribs. You catch the sour scent of unwashed wool and skin that hasn't touched warm water in months. He doesn't flinch at the whiff. He wears it like armor. His neighbors eye him from a distance, pressing scented scraps to their noses when they pass. He just smirks. To him, every wrinkle of the nose means another day the plague keeps its distance. In plague years, many believed that washing too much weakened the body's humors, letting deadly air slip inside open pores. But this small defiance was different. These were people who turned their own odor into a protective charm. Some historians scoff at the idea, calling it folk nonsense. Others argue there's a stubborn logic buried under the filth fleas, disliked pungent oils, harsh smoke, bitter herbs rubbed into skin. So why not body odor too? You watch as the man fishes a crust of bread from under his cloak. He wipes it on his sleeve before biting down. A dog skulks nearby, but even it keeps its distance. Under layers of dirt and sweat, the man has coated himself in the perfume of the street's fish guts, from the market soot, from a fire pit last week's ale soaked into his cuffs. No scented pomander for him. His belief is simpler. If bad air brings death, maybe worse air drives it away. Nearby, a woman adjusts the shawl around her shoulders, straw poking from seams where fleas might hide. She sprinkles ashes into her hair, a trick some swore by to keep lice from burrowing too deep. She hasn't bathed since the harvest. When asked, she shrugs. Why wash away what keeps her safe? There's no scholarly consensus on how many truly embrace this pungent creed, but church records hint at sudden spikes in unwashed parishioners, pews stinking of sweat and fear. A quirky detail curls into the shadows. Some folk went so far as to rub rancid animal fat onto skin, believing the thick, greasy coat blocked plague-bearing vapors. A butcher's apprentice might smear himself with leftover tallow, stinking so fiercely that even rats kept a polite distance. Did it work? Probably not. But when no one understood fleas, miasmas, or bacteria, sometimes your best shield was the story you told yourself every morning you woke up alive. You drift behind the man as he shuffles down a lane past an abandoned well, where water once tempted him to wash. He spits near the stones, muttering a half prayer that the well stays dry. No bath means no weakness. Better to stink than to die clean. In an alley corner, a small brazier smolders with damp herbs. Someone, perhaps the man, perhaps his neighbors, burns nettles, garlic skins, onion peels. The thick smoke clings to every ragged cloak, coating cloth and skin, in a stench so sharp it chases away the night chill. Some stand in the smoke, willingly arms spread like scarecrows, turning slowly to make sure every fold of wool drinks in the reek. A passing priest, pauses, lifting the hem of his robe to skirt the group. He carries rosewater beads at his waist, a faint sweetness, lost in the reek, rising from the alley. He blesses them anyway, a quick sign of the cross over souls too stubborn to cleanse. Historians note these tensions, where faith in soap and faith in stink clashed in muddy doorways and rank church pews. The man ducks under a tattered awning. He curls up in straw that hasn't been changed since last frost, pulls a sack over his head, and drifts toward sleep, wrapped in the musk of his own survival plan. No rose water, no soap. Just a hope that his stink is stronger than death's whisper. Step back into the street, the smoke stinging your eyes, the stench clinging to your thoughts. Ahead, you'll glimpse the last echo of this filthy saga, how centuries of dirt and dread shaped a new fear of filth and sparked slow revolutions in how Europe chose to wash itself clean. Step through the lingering haze of that rank alleyway one final time until the night air feels almost fresh again, if only because you've breathed so much worse. Here at the ragged edge of plague's reign, you stand on the cusp of something different, the slow, grudging birth of Europe's obsession with washing away the centuries of dirt that nearly drowned it. Imagine the first years after the plague's worst waves subsided, when grave pits lay quiet straw bedding, got a second shaking, and bathhouses, though never spotless, began to hum again with cautious visitors. Rumors still lingered. Of course, some clung to the old fears that too much washing weakened the body's defenses. Others, horrified by the memory of pits overflowing with the unwashed dead, whispered that filth had betrayed them. And so from that grim paradox, something new crept in the seed of hygiene as salvation. A merchant in Florence stands in his cramped workshop, running a damp cloth across his face. Beside him, a small block of olive oil soap rests on a chipped plate, rare, precious, bought at a cost that would have seemed foolish a generation before. He dips it in rainwater from a clay jug, rubs it between cracked palms. The scent of herbs, thyme, rosemary, maybe a hint of citrus, drifts into the stale air of his shop, pushing back the ghosts of plague-borne stink. Historians mark these small moments as quiet turning points. Not revolutions shouted from rooftops, but tiny rebellions against the centuries of grime that made the Black Death so lethal. Soap makers, once a minor trade, found new worth in towns where families had seen too much filth to trust it again. City councils began passing modest rules. Keep streets, swept cover waste pits. Fine the neighbor who lets refuse flow past your door. You lean against a cold stone wall as a young maid carries a bucket through the alley. She sprinkles fresh water over cobblestones where pigs once rooted through scraps. She doesn't scrub them clean, no one could not yet, but it's a start. Some scholars argue this shift came from science inching forward. Others say it was just human stubbornness, a refusal to let bad air and crawling fleas win so easily a second time. A quirky detail clings to the memory of these early changes. Perfumers found booming trade making scented soaps and herbal sachets for those who feared stink as much as sickness. In Paris, merchants hawked rosewater sprays and lemon oil pomanders from carts in market squares. In London, lye soap makers tucked rosemary sprigs into their barrels to sweeten the harshness of animal fat. Even kings, who once wore lavender sachets as a poor substitute for baths, began to soak more often their marble tubs, fed by newfangled indoor pumps. Yet surviving records remind us it was far from perfect. Fleas didn't vanish overnight. Shared towels, dirty beds, clogged gutters, they lingered for centuries. But something cracked open in the public mind. Maybe the stink didn't shield you after all. Maybe water soap and cautious scrubbing could keep the reaper's beaked mask at bay. You follow a slow trickle of water down a stone gutter. It winds past shuttered inns and candlelit houses, carrying away ash and scraps. Children toss pebbles into the flow, giggling as they splash the pale foam drifting atop the runoff foam born of soap slivers that would have seemed wasteful folly to their plague-time grandparents. Somewhere, inside a warm cottage, a father scolds his son for splashing too much water out of the wash basin. "Save it," he says, "for your mother needs it next." One basin for the family old habits die slowly. But the fact that he cares at all, that he worries about the water being wasted, says everything. Dirt was no longer armor. Dirt was an enemy that smelled of death. You stand back, letting the gutter's tiny tide carry the memory away. In this gentle trickle lies the quiet truth of how the plague's filth forced Europe to think differently about clean. A lesson scrubbed into skin, soaked through straw beds, whispered down narrow alleys. A lesson that one day would become the mundane promise of a warm bath and a fresh towel, no longer dangerous, but a mark of hope. Yet while soap and water found their place, another cure took root in tangled gardens, where hope smelled sharp and green, fighting plague, not with baths, but with leaves and breath. Imagine stepping barefoot into a tangled medieval herb garden at dawn. Dew beads cling to sage leaves like tiny glass, tears. Garlic bulbs hang braided by doorways to ward off invisible horrors, and onions, humble pungent, are packed in linen pouches to wear around the neck. Why? Because for your ancestors, these sharp, earthy plants were the closest thing to hope when death came scratching at the gate. They believed that what smelled strong must be strong enough to fight the unseen. So they clipped rosemary sprigs and stuffed mint in pillowcases, hoping sleep would come sweet and the sickness stay away. Some villagers even laid fresh herbs under floorboards or above lintels, convinced the right leaf could stop a plague-bearing breeze. You step along narrow garden rows, your fingers brushing stalks of sage and rue. The wind carries a sharp bite of garlic, reminding you that in these times your survival might rest on whether your breath stinks enough to scare the plague away. There's a moment just before sunrise when the garden feels alive, like it's breathing back at you. Birds stir in the thatch roofs beyond the hedges, but your mind clings to the green promise of each leaf. A real fact to tuck under your pillow, medieval herbals listed hundreds of plants for fighting fevers, each with its own whispered spell or hidden superstition. Sage for wisdom and cleansing. Garlic for purifying the blood. Onions to draw out bad air. But whether they healed or harmed is a question historians still turn over like dry leaves in old books. Sometimes you imagine a peasant woman, hunched by candlelight, crushing herbs with a mortar carved from local stone. She hums a charm under her breath, half prayer, half protest against the unstoppable. By daylight, she'll tuck her little vials of rosemary and thyme into cloth satchels, selling hope door to door. You can almost hear her voice, soft, persuasive, promising that this blend will banish coughs and evil alike. And here's a curious twist: scholars debate whether these gardens were really practical pharmacies or more like tiny green wards against fear. Some argue that the true cure wasn't the plant itself, but the comfort of doing something. Because when illness strikes without mercy, plucking a leaf can feel like grasping control from chaos. In the hush of the garden, you notice a detail that always makes you smile. Woven scarecrows, made not just to chase crows, but to confuse dark spirits who might slip through the hedgerows. Bits of cloth flap in the breeze, a patchwork prayer that sickness will lose its way among the herbs. You press deeper into the garden. Sunlight spills through the trees, catching the silver edges of sage and the dull green of garlic tops. There's an odd serenity here, as if the plants themselves keep secrets better left unsaid. It's just you, the rustle of leaves, and the steady hum of life in a world forever teetering between bloom and blight. What lingers tonight is this: the medieval garden was never just a patch of plants. It was a sanctuary, a last stand against invisible doom. A place where hope grew leaf by leaf, root by root, pungent enough to mask the stench of fear. A hush hangs over the small stone hut at the edge of the village where you find your next cure bloodletting. A practice so routine, so trusted, that the same man who trims your beard might be the one to open your veins. You sit on a creaking stool, the cold iron of the razor glinting in the candlelight. They say the body's humors must stay in balance: blood phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, like delicate liquids in unseen vials sloshing inside you. If you're sick, surely something inside has tipped too far. The barber surgeon flicks his blade across a leather strap, testing its bite. Outside, the wind rattles the wooden shutters. Inside, you offer up your arm like a confession. He ties a strip of linen tight around your bicep until the veins bloom blue against your skin. Then comes the slice, a quick, shallow cut meant to drain the sickness with your blood. They believe that by releasing a few ounces, they'll free you from fever headaches, or worse. Records show that some patients gave pints at a time, their pale faces proof that illness, and sometimes life itself, was slipping away drop by drop. Historians still argue whether barbers and barber surgeons truly helped or merely hastened the end for many who trusted the blade more than the herbs. A quirky detail: some barbershops proudly displayed bowls of clotted rags in the window, a sign that healing happened here. The iconic red and white pole you see outside modern barbers, that's said to echo the bloodied bandages twisting in the breeze to dry. You watch the barber wipe his blade clean on a strip of linen already stained from countless others. He hums under his breath, a melody to steady his hand. He talks of humors like old friends: choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, sanguine, each one lurking behind your eyes, under your tongue, in your liver's shadows. To heal you is to rebalance you, as if the soul itself were liquid that might leak away. The cut stings, but the warmth of your own blood brings a strange calm. You wonder how many people sat on this same stool, how many farmers and wives and children trusted this same blade. Maybe they whispered prayers. Maybe they bit down on a rag and thought of their families, hoping the drips into the bowl would buy another day. Some scholars remain puzzled by the staying power of this ritual. For centuries, bloodletting lingered stubbornly in medical practice, from village huts to royal chambers. Even kings felt the sting of the blade, sometimes fatally. The question hangs in the air, like the iron tang of fresh blood. Did it ever truly help? Or did people cling to it simply because doing nothing felt worse? You glance at the bowl as the barber ties off your arm, binding the wound with more linen. The flicker of the candle catches the dark swirl inside part of you left behind. There's something almost holy in this exchange, a tiny sacrifice meant to chase death back into the night. Beyond the door, the village stirs. A child's cough echoes down the lane. Somewhere a dog barks at a shape only it can see. You rise unsteadily, blood loss, making the edges of the world soft and dreamlike. The barber nods once, already sharpening his blade for the next soul in line. And when you step outside, you carry the mark of 1,000 before you, your blood, a prayer, your bandage, a promise that you've done all you can. For now at least, the humors rest quiet within. Dawn creeps through the damp mist as you wander toward the village pond, drawn by the promise of yet another cure, this one small, slippery, and hungry. On a low wooden bench sits a clay jar, its lid barely holding back a restless swirl inside. You lift it carefully, peering in to find them leeches, slick ribbons of black coiling over one another in cold water, waiting for the warmth of living flesh. Medieval healers believed that if your blood was tainted foul humors running riot, then a leech could be your savior. You picture it now, a healer in a rough wool tunic, sleeves rolled up, gently pressing a plump leech against a patient's pale skin. The creature finds its mark, quickly attaching itself with tiny saw-like teeth. It drinks deep, gorging until it swells 3 times its size. Strangely, it hardly hurts, just a dull tug, like an itch you can't scratch. There's a peculiar calm in this practice. You sit still, the pond's breeze brushing your face, while this little surgeon works in silence. A single leech can draw as much blood as a barber's blade, only slower, softer, more discreet. Some say the slimy healer leaves behind a cleaner wound, less shock to the body. But historians still debate whether the humble leech ever did more good than harm, or if its true magic was simply the comfort of watching something else fight your sickness for you. In the healer's hut, jars of fresh leeches line the shelves like squirming black necklaces. They're gathered from ponds and marshes plucked off the legs of unlucky animals or waited for at dawn by barefoot children. A single pond might feed a whole village's supply, each creature destined for a different fevered brow or swollen limb. A quirky footnote. Some medieval nobles kept pet leeches, feeding them delicacies of milk or blood drops from game they hunted, ensuring a steady supply when the next illness came knocking. Others sold them in bustling market stalls, hawking leeches alongside onions, garlic, and dried herbs, a strange collection of hope in burlap sacks. You sit by the pond, now imagining the soft tug of a leech at your ankle. Beyond the rippling water, reeds whisper secrets you'll never quite catch. You think of how each leech holds no judgment, no promises, just hunger. It doesn't care if you're a peasant or a priest, a child or a king. It drinks it, drops off, it slips back into its jar to wait for the next pulse of warm blood. Researchers continue to debate whether the popularity of leeching was more superstition than science. Some ancient doctors insisted these creatures could reopen blocked channels, allowing the body's life force to flow free. Others called them parasites, in every sense of the word, helpful only in draining both wallets and veins. Yet the image sticks, a flickering candle, the glisten of damp skin, the healer's calm hum, as another leech takes hold. It's oddly intimate, this small, dark ritual of trust. One heartbeat feeding another. You shift your feet in the wet grass, feeling the cold creep through your boots. Somewhere a frog croaks, unaware it too will play its part in this strange arsenal of cures. But for now, it's just you, the pond, and the quiet, methodical work of a creature as old as folklore itself. When the healer lifts the jar to pack away the sated leeches, you see your own faint reflection in the water. Paler now, maybe, but touched by the curious comfort that for tonight at least you've given your illness a worthy rival. The village pond fades behind you as you follow a narrow path to a cottage where tonight's next remedy waits croaking in the shadows. You pause at the threshold inside an elderly healer, leans over a wooden table, scattered with scraps of linen, tiny clay pots, and a burlap sack that shifts now and then with a sluggish thump. She beckons you closer, her fingers stained green from herbs and something else altogether stranger. Out of the bag comes a frog alive, wide-eyed legs, splayed in a futile push against her palms. Here in the hush of candlelight, the healer explains how villagers believe this little amphibian is more than a mere creature of ponds and rain. To them, the frog is a living sponge for poison, a squirming charm to draw sickness from a body teetering between fever and delirium. You sit on a creaking stool while she wraps the frog in a strip of linen, then gently ties it against an angry red sore blooming on your arm. The frog wiggles, the linen holds firm, and the healer hums a chant older than the creaking beams overhead. Some say the creature's cold skin soothes the burning swell. Others claim it pulls the pestilence through its belly and out of your veins. A single fact croaks louder than any superstition in medieval Europe. Frog poultices appear in more than one plague ledger. Written orders survive listing frogs alongside garlic, onions, and vinegar as must-have supplies for a healer's shelf. Scholars remain divided on whether this was real treatment or a final desperate act when prayers and potions had all failed. Outside, the night air carries the faint gurgle of the nearby stream, home to more frogs waiting their turn under rough cloth bindings. It's a curious sight if you peek through the healer's shutters, villagers resting on straw mats, arms and legs lumped with frogs strapped tight, each amphibian a silent stand-in for a surgeon's blade. There's something darkly comical in the notion that a frog might shoulder your plague while you sleep. A few villagers swear by it, claiming the frog, if left overnight, will swell and darken a sign it has sucked the poison free. Whether true or not, the healer never wastes a chance to remind you, replace the frog before it dies, lest the sickness slip back in. A quirky rumor drifts through these mud lanes. Some folk whisper that if the frog croaks loudly while bound to your skin, it's the pestilence crying out as it flees. So each croak is both dread and hope, a sound that means you might wake in the morning lighter than before. You shift, feeling the frog's tiny heartbeat pulse against your sore. Its webbed foot twitches like a nervous drum. There's a surreal hush in this exchange, your warmth for its life, your fear for its cold, indifferent patience. No blades, no herbs, just this strange, living charm pressed against skin and nightmare alike. Researchers continue to sift through old case notes and letters, hunting for proof that frogs did anything but confuse the desperate. Some argue that the ritual alone brought comfort, a sense that if you did something, you might keep death a day away. Others dismiss it as harmless folly, one more page in the ledger of human superstition. For now, though, you settle back on the stool, the healer's soft chant filling the space between candle flickers. The frog shifts, settles, croaks, once a faint sound swallowed by the wood smoke curling up through the thatched roof. Beyond the cottage door, the pond frogs sing in chorus with the wind. Inside, you close your eyes, letting the cool skin of your strange companion pull you a little further from fever's edge. At dawn, the frog is gone, slipped back to the stream, or traded for another by the healer's hand. You stand in the chill air outside the cottage, your skin still tingling where the linen wrap clung all night. But there's no time to rest easy, because word drifts through the village of a remedy that makes the frog trick look positively ordinary. A small jug, a sour smell, and a sip that tests every ounce of your courage. You find yourself standing beside a crooked table in another hut, staring at a clay vessel half filled with liquid the color of weak tea. A healer lifts the jug, swirling its contents with a swirl that releases a scent so sharp it seems to slap your nose awake. This is no herb, no potion of petals and roots. It's urine. Human urine, aged for days in stoppered jugs stacked behind the cottage. You watch as the healer dips a wooden ladle and pours a trickle into a pewter cup. He murmurs something about purification, how your body's own waste can somehow become its salvation, if only you're brave enough to swallow what once was cast off. Medieval texts sometimes called this golden elixir a promise that the body might heal itself if you fed it back its own filtered humors. You bring the cup to your lips, trying not to breathe. The smell curls up into your nose anyway, sharp ammonia and something darker beneath. The first sip makes your tongue recoil, your stomach clench. But you swallow, because you've heard the rumors, drink enough, and maybe the plague won't find you. Or so the healers claim. Some physicians of the age prescribed it alongside herbs, believing that fresh or stale urine could wash out bad blood when mixed with garlic or honey. Others advised it as an external wash, dabbed onto sores to dry them, rinsed through wounds to cleanse infection. Historians still puzzle over these accounts, wondering if there was any benefit at all. Some argue that mild ammonia might clean wounds a fraction better than muddy water, but few dare defend the cup. A quirky detail to make your toes curl under the blanket monks, in certain orders, kept their own chamber pots carefully labeled for different medicinal ages. 3 days old, 7 days old, each brew supposedly held unique powers for humors out of balance. Sometimes they mixed it with rosewater or herbs to soften the taste, but let's be honest, no rose could truly mask that bite. You set the cup down with shaking fingers. The healer nods solemnly as if you've just sworn an oath. Outside, the village begins to stir, muffled chatter, coughing fits echoing off stone walls. You wonder how many others have stood here staring at the same jug, whispering a prayer that something so repulsive might be the secret to staying alive. Some scholars argue this was pure desperation, a practice clinging to the ancient belief that, like cures like that, the body's own fluids might be keys to unlocking balance within. Others see it as ritual theater, a final bluff against an enemy no blade or herb could slay. The healer places the jug back among its brothers on a shelf. You swear they watch you, a row of mute witnesses to your hope, your fear, and your refusal to do nothing at all. Outside, the air is sharp with the coming day, but inside the hut clings to its bitter warmth. You step away from the table, your stomach unsettled yet oddly steady. In this village of garlic garlands and frog poultices, a sip of yourself is just another line, crossed another tiny rebellion against the plague's invisible siege. The door creaks open to let you out into the waking world, where the sun brushes the thatched roofs, gold, and the memory of what you drank lingers on your tongue. Proof that sometimes survival demands you swallow more than your pride. The village air shifts as you leave behind the stale jugs and their bitter secrets. Now, you follow the narrow lane that winds past cottages and low stone fences drawn by a thin thread of smoke curling into the gray dawn sky. Your feet crunch over frost-bitten straw as you near a small hut where the air is thick with burning herbs and something harsher, still sulfur, acrid and sharp, biting at your eyes long before you step inside. Inside, an old woman tends the fire at the center of the room, feeding handfuls of dried sage rosemary and handfuls of pungent yellow powder into a clay brazier. Smoke coils upward, crawling along the ceiling beams before slipping through cracks in the thatched roof. You stand in the doorway, blinking away tears as the fumes sting your nose and throat. To the villagers, this smoke is hope made visible, an invisible shield that might keep pestilence at bay. They believe that burning certain herbs and minerals can cleanse a sick house, drive out the foul air that carries death on its unseen wings. The stronger the stench, the stronger the protection. So families huddle together, wrapping damp cloths around their faces, trusting that the choking cloud might purify their breath before the plague finds its way inside. A historical fact lingers like a wisp in this haze. During outbreaks of the Black Death, entire streets burned barrels of pitch tar or sulfur to sweeten the air. Some city officials even ordered great bonfires in public squares, hoping columns of smoke would chase away the pestilent spirits. Some scholars still argue whether the practice helped at all. Maybe the smoke kept rats and fleas at bay. Maybe it did nothing but soothe terrified minds desperate for action. A curious detail, healers sometimes added precious spices like cinnamon or cloves to their fumigation mix, not because they worked miracles, but because a whiff of sweetness could mask the sulfur's sting, tricking the mind into feeling cleaner, safer, even if the illness still lurked under floorboards and in the folds of bedding. You move deeper into the smoky room. Shapes shift and waver behind the haze baskets of dried herbs stacked like brittle trophies of a never-ending war. The old woman gestures for you to hold out your cloak so she can fan a fresh cloud toward you. The heat prickles your face, your eyes water, but you stand still because here in the swirl of scented ash, you're doing something. You're pushing back, however feebly, against the black tide. Some villagers swear, by the ritual smoke, the rooms daily keep the windows shut, and the air outside won't dare creep in. Others mutter that it's folly that no smoke, no matter how thick, can stop what moves from neighbor to neighbor on a cough or a whispered prayer. Yet even skeptics line up to buy bundles of dried sage and packets of sulfur from the apothecary's stall. The act itself becomes a lullaby light. The herbs watch the smoke rise, believe that tomorrow will come. Researchers continue to debate whether these smoky customs lingered because they worked or because they gave people something to cling to when hope was as thin as the air they tried to purify. You watch the old woman toss another fistful of herbs onto the brazier. Sparks leap up, crackle, and vanish in the swirl. Somewhere beyond the thick door, the world waits streets where rats skitter under carts, where coughing echoes off stone, where families bar windows and doors and trust that what burns inside these walls will guard them through the longest night. When you finally step out your cloak and hair carry the scent of scorched rosemary and sulfur, a pungent reminder that sometimes protection is just a cloud of smoke curling toward the sky, a fragile promise drifting into the chill wind. The taste of smoke still clings to your tongue as you drift down the lane past shuttered cottages and the quiet hum of villagers going about their uneasy chores. But tonight's next cure waits not in herbs or croaking ponds, nor even in the sharp bite of a barber's blade. This one flickers and crackles behind locked doors, a desperate attempt to cleanse the very walls that shelter you. You pause outside a timber house where soot-blackened windows rattle with muffled sounds inside. A family gathers around a hearth, piled high with splintered furniture, old straw, and scraps of cloth soaked in oil. The father tosses another bundle onto the blaze, while his wife murmurs prayers, and the children clutch each other near the threshold, their eyes wide in the fire's glow. Fire fumigation. An act so reckless, yet so strangely practical, that entire medieval streets sometimes echoed with the roar of flames meant not to destroy, but to save. The belief is simple enough: if pestilence clings to clothes' walls and rafters, then fire pure hungry and absolute might drive it out. Better to scorch a room than bury a family. A documented fact flickers in the embers in plague-stricken towns. It wasn't unusual to see landlords torching tenant houses between occupants, convinced that flame would consume the invisible miasma left by the sick. Some cities ordered whole neighborhoods burned when outbreaks refused to yield. Historians still argue if this brutal cleansing helped slow the spread or only deepened the ruin. Inside, you watch the father lift a smoldering brazier into a dark corner, waving a bundle of burning herbs to coax the heat higher. Smoke curls up the beams, blackening thatch and timber alike. Sparks flit like fireflies across the room. The family coughs, eyes watering, but they stay trusting that the choking air is kinder than the plague's silent touch. A curious detail drifts through the haze. Some healers swore by sulfur-soaked torches, dragged room to room, smoldering just enough to fill every nook with bitter fumes. Others favored throwing aromatic branches into the blaze: juniper, pine, rosemary, so the smoke that choked the sickness might at least smell sweet as it worked. You stand by the door, feeling the warmth push back the night's chill. There's a comfort here, fierce and fleeting, in watching flames dance across old rush mats and cracked beams. Fire is both threat and salvation, an ancient force that can cradle life one moment and swallow it whole the next. Researchers continue to debate whether these smoky infernos ever truly stopped pestilence's crawl. Some argue they did little more than drive away fleas and rats for a night. Others wonder if the ritual offered something deeper, a last blazing defiance when medicine and prayers fell silent. The father tosses a final scrap onto the flames, then herds his children outside as the hearth roars hotter. The family gathers under the eaves, coughing into sleeves, eyes reflecting the flicker of hope and ruin mingled in the same spark. Tomorrow they'll scrub soot from the walls and sweep away ash that clings to every beam. For now, they stand together, cloaked in the belief that fire has done what herbs and leeches could not. As you slip away down the lane, the night wind tugs at your cloak, carrying with it the scent of charred wood and scorched thatch. Behind you, a thin plume of smoke twirls into the starless sky, proof that sometimes the only way to banish an invisible threat is to feed your house to the hungry glow of flame and trust that by morning the plague might find another door to knock on. The scent of charred timber lingers as you leave the smoking cottage behind, weaving deeper into the village, where another strange cure waits this one, slathered on in the hush of midnight, thick and greasy, promising protection with every sticky smear. You find the healer, crouched by a low fire, stirring a blackened iron pot that bubbles with something halfway between kitchen stew and forbidden alchemy. She gestures for you to sit on a rough stool beside her. In the pot, lumps of goat fat melt into a slick pool that glistens in the flickering light. Into this, she drops pinches of dried herb sage again, of course, but also thyme, rosemary, and a handful of dark powdered resin ground from pine bark. The scent is strange, part barnyard, part green woodland, all bound together by the heavy cloying note of melting tallow. Goat fat ointments, another link in this chain of medieval folk cures. You hold out your arm as the healer dips her wooden spatula into the pot and spreads the mixture over a bandage of rough linen. She hums to herself, a tune passed down by mothers who swore that what a knife could not cut away, this fat might smother. A fact to rub into the night goat fat lard and other animal greases appear in dozens of medieval plague recipes. Mixed with herbs, ashes, or even precious spices if you could afford them, these unguents were believed to draw out bad humors or form a barrier against plague-carrying mists. Historians still debate whether these sticky shields did anything but stain sheets and soothe anxious minds. A curious detail, some villagers swore that the best fat came from goats fed on nothing but wild garlic and onions. They believed the sharpness of these plants seeped into the animal's flesh, making the salve twice as strong, a double dose of nature's defense packed into every greasy smear. The healer smooths the ointment across your chest, now careful to work it into your skin. The fat clings warm and strangely comforting, a layer between your flesh and the cold breath of the plague that stalks the alleys outside. By the glow of the fire, you glimpse jars of more powders, ashes from burned herbs, scraps of beeswax, even a tiny phial of oil pressed from crushed poppy seeds. Each ingredient a story, a wish, a whisper against death's door. Some villagers even wore these ointments as talismans, carrying the scent of goat and sage wherever they walked. A few desperate souls smeared the paste on door frames and windowsills, convinced it would confuse the plague, turn it away from hearth and kin alike. Scholars puzzle over this practice, wondering if these greasy rituals were born from half-remembered ancient medicine, or if they were simply hope pressed into skin. You shift on the stool as the healer wraps you in a clean length of cloth, binding the warm ointment tight to your chest. She nods once, as if her work is done for now, but you catch her slipping another dollop into a small clay jar, just in case you need to reapply when the wind changes. Outside, the village lies quiet but restless. A dog barks at a passing shadow. A door slams against a gust of wind that rattles every shutter in its path. Inside this hut, though the world shrinks to firelight, warm fat, and the soft scrape of the healer's spoon against iron, researchers continue to wonder if these ointments did more than comfort the sick. Maybe they trapped fleas or blocked bites. Maybe they were nothing more than greasy prayers. But to the villagers, each smear was a promise that no matter how close the plague crept, they would meet it head-on, armed with goat fat and garlic, binding their fear in layers of pungent hope. The night deepens as you step away from the warmth of goat fat and burning herbs, your skin slick beneath your cloak, where the ointment still clings. You follow a crooked lane that winds between mossy walls and shuttered windows, drawn by the soft glint of something swinging from door frames, and necks alike, talismans, amulets, and charms etched with symbols, half forgotten and half feared. You pause beneath the low eaves of a cottage where an old man sits hunched by candlelight, threading tiny beads and bits of bone onto a leather cord. Around him, scraps of parchment lie scattered, each scrawled with symbols that look more like a secret code than any prayer you've ever seen. He doesn't glance up as you approach. His fingers work in steady rhythm, tying knots with a care that feels almost holy. Talisman tricks. The village swears by them. When herbs and ointments fail, when frogs croak uselessly and fires burn low, a scrap of iron or a twist of twine might stand guard in your place. These charms carry strange promises to confuse death, to blind the plague spirits drifting through alleys, to lure pestilence away from your door and toward a neighbor too careless to wear theirs right. A sober fact, medieval records brim with orders for talismans and plague marks, inscribed coins, pewter discs, tiny lead crosses etched with protective prayers in Latin or runes, too old for the church to approve. Some were worn around the neck, some nailed to doorposts, where sick rooms hid secrets behind bolted shutters. There are accounts of healers selling them in marketplaces beside onions and garlic braids, one-stop shops for your soul's insurance policy. A curious detail flickers in the candlelight. Some villagers kept entire pouches of oddities, wolf teeth, rabbit feet, scraps of fur, bits of iron nails bent just so. Anything with a whiff of magic or protection went into the pouch, hung around the neck, or tucked under a child's pillow. Some folk whispered that the plague couldn't count, so charms tricked it into circling aimlessly until dawn chased it off. You watch the old man finish tying his cord. He lifts the amulet to the light, a dull brass disc inscribed with a looping symbol that feels more like a riddle than a cure. He ties it around your neck with careful hands, muttering a chant in a dialect that drifts away like smoke before you can catch its meaning. The disc rests cold against your collarbone, a quiet promise pressed into metal. Scholars still debate whether these talismans worked as anything more than hope made solid. Some argue they served the same purpose as frogs or leeches, to make you feel that you'd done something. To stand guard in the dark hours when prayers slipped through trembling lips. Others wonder if belief itself was the cure fear, bent and bound in iron and bone, carrying enough faith to ease a fevered mind. You step back into the chill, the amulet hidden beneath your cloak, but heavy as a secret. Around you, other villagers clutch their charms, little children with pewter discs, swinging against wool tunics, widows with scraps of parchment tucked into laced bodices, farmers who nail iron crosses above pig pens as if the plague might spare the beasts if properly bribed. A dog howls somewhere beyond the hedge, its voice tangled in the wind. Your fingers find the talisman at your throat, tracing its etched lines. In this fragile village, each charm is a whispered spell, a handshake with the unseen, a promise that when the plague comes knocking, it might just turn away if it sees a symbol it doesn't dare cross. So you walk on the disc cold, but steady the knot at your neck, tugging just enough to remind you that you are not alone. That even if the herbs fail, the blood drains, and the frogs slip away, a tiny circle of brass still stands between you and the night. You drift from the candlelit talisman workshop into the narrow lanes once more, your steps muffled by the hush that comes when a village collectively holds its breath. Ahead, a faint glow flickers behind the shutters of a stone cottage. You follow the light nose twitching at the sharp tang that drifts on the night air, a sour note that cuts through the lingering scent of smoke and goat fat. Here lies another cure, simple yet stinging vinegar washes. Inside, a mother sits by the hearth, dipping rough linen into a wooden basin filled with vinegar so sharp it could wake the dead, though that's precisely what everyone here wants to avoid. Her hands are raw from the constant dipping, wringing, and wiping, but she works with quiet determination, wiping down her son's fevered brow, then his arms, then every patch of skin that might tempt the plague to settle in. You kneel beside the basin, watching the liquid ripple under the flickering rushlight. Vinegar, humble wine turned sour, was once precious enough to flavor stews and preserve meats. But now, in this fearful little room, it's a shield, a potion not swallowed, but pressed into the skin to purify every pore. People believe the acid might strip away bad humors, block the invisible miasma, or scrub out the filth that brings death closer with every cough. One sober fact records of plague outbreaks describe barrels of vinegar sold out in days, with healers prescribing baths, compresses, and gargles. Some households mixed it with rose water to soften the sting, but for most, the sharper, the better pain meant purity, and purity meant a fighting chance. A curious detail: some traveling plague doctors carried tiny glass flasks of vinegar on a chain at their waist, dipping the tips of their long, bird-like masks into the acid before facing the sick. The sharp tang masked the stench of illness, and they hoped it might also chase away the evil that floated in foul air. You watch the mother wring out the cloth and press it to her child's neck. The boy shifts under his rough blanket eyes, fluttering behind swollen lids. His skin shines in the low light, damp with the constant washing. Each pass of the cloth is part blessing, part ritual cool vinegar, to cleanse, to guard, to do something when prayers feel thin and dry. Some scholars remain puzzled about whether vinegar did any real good. Perhaps its acid bite killed a handful of germs unseen by medieval eyes. Perhaps it simply soothed desperate minds by giving the frightened hands a task that felt like defense. Researchers argue, still, was the comfort worth the sting? Or did the vinegar simply keep fear at bay for a few precious hours? You reach for the basin. The mother nods, wordless, guiding your hand to the soaked cloth. It's cold, almost shockingly, so as you lift it to your own wrist and feel the burn seep into your skin. In this simple act, a cloth dipped, a fevered brow, wipes centuries of fear and hope swirl like sediment in an old barrel. Vinegar's sharpness becomes a quiet chant: cleanse, protect, endure. Beyond the shutter, dawn begins to whisper at the edges of the sky. The mother hums a lullaby, older than the pestilence, older than the vinegar, older than the fear that presses against these walls like an unwelcome guest. You press the cloth to your forehead, feeling its sour bite ground you in this tiny, fragile moment. Somewhere down the lane, more barrels wait to be drawn, more cloths to be dipped. For now, you share this basin, this sting, this soft promise that as long as there is vinegar left to pour, the plague must fight to find its way in. As the sun breaks timidly through the gray dawn, you step away from the vinegar hut, your skin still tingling where the sharp wash kissed your forehead. The lane opens into the village square, where a line of barefoot figures winds through the mist, ghostly shapes draped in plain wool, some with hoods pulled low, some bareheaded despite the chill. They move in solemn rhythm, lashes coiled in rough hands, voices lost to the muffled sound of flesh striking flesh. These are the plague procession's marches of penitents who believe that if they bleed enough for the sins of the world, perhaps the pestilence will spare their homes. You stand at the edge of the lane as they pass the soft thwack of knotted cords on bare backs, echoing against the cold stone walls. The smell here is neither herbs nor vinegar, but sweat and damp wool, and something older, a fear that no potion can soothe. Some carry wooden crosses or faded icons, but most just walk heads, bowed lashes, rising and falling in steady penance. They murmur prayers that drift like mist, apologies offered to a sky they hope is listening. A fact to remember: flagellant processions spread across Europe in desperate waves whenever the plague struck hardest. Ordinary people whipped themselves raw, believing God's wrath might be softened by the sound of human skin cracking open in the night. Sometimes these bands numbered in the hundreds, snaking through village after village until towns banned them for fear they spread more terror than peace. A curious detail flickers through this gloom. In some regions, the marchers believed that mixing their blood with the soil would trap the pestilence underground. Others whispered that the sight of such penance might frighten demons away. Scholars still argue whether these processions calmed more hearts than they harmed, or if they became contagions of fear all on their own. One man breaks from the line as he passes you. His eyes find yours bright and feverish as he drags the lash across his own shoulder in a practiced arc. The welt rises quickly, angry and red, a fresh ribbon of hope or madness, you can't quite tell which. He mouths a prayer as he passes a breathless syllable that vanishes under the sound of another lash striking another back. You follow behind for a few steps, feet matching their shuffle over the cobblestones. Every so often, one penitent drops to his knees, forehead pressed to the stones, until the others circle back, lifting him gently to his feet before the procession limps on. There's a hush in this ritual. No drums, no chants of triumph, just the dull slap of chords, and the soft weeping of those who hope pain might barter mercy. Some historians believe these processions spread more than faith rumors linger of outbreaks, flaring wherever flagellants pass through their bloodied backs, breeding new infection in the very streets they sought to cleanse. Yet for the villagers who join in, each lash is a promise that they haven't surrendered. If God's favor is fickle, perhaps skin and blood can purchase a second chance. The line winds out of the square, vanishing down the lane that leads to the chapel on the hill. A few watchers linger, old women muttering prayers into shawls, children clutching scraps of cloth that might one day be tied around their own arms in some quiet ritual of borrowed hope. You stand alone now, the echoes of the lashes fading with the last bare feet shuffling into the dawn. The square feels strangely hollow in their wake, a silence too large for its stones to hold. You brush your fingertips across your sleeve, half expecting to find blood there too. But it's only vinegar, and the faint memory of goat fat smoke, and all the other desperate barriers stitched between fragile flesh and a plague that knocks more loudly with each passing hour. The square lies quiet after the barefoot penitents vanish up the hill, but the hush doesn't last. From somewhere behind the chapel's stone wall, you hear a low thrum like footsteps out of sync, punctuated by bursts of faint laughter and a strange, feverish hum that floats through the morning mist. You drift closer, drawn by a rhythm that feels too alive for this plague-haunted village. At the edge of a clearing, you find them men, women, even children, spinning and stomping on the frost-bitten grass. No music drifts from hidden lutes or pipes, just the slap of feet, the occasional clap of hands, and the ragged breaths of bodies moving long past the point of sense or rest. This is no festival dance. This is dancing mania, the wild, contagious spinning that swept through medieval Europe like a spell none could break. They say that when fear grows too big for silence, the body moves on its own. Some historians describe entire villages overtaken by these frenzied neighbors flinging themselves into writhing circles that pulsed through streets for hours, sometimes days, until exhaustion or collapse stole the rhythm away. To the watchers left behind, the dancers looked bewitched, possessed by saintly visions or demon hands, depending on who told the story. One sober fact, some records claim the dancing started when plague and famine left people numb to grief. Whole towns joined in, hoping the frantic spinning would drive illness out through sweat and motion like shaking pestilence loose from the bones. Some city councils hired musicians to accompany the dance, trying to contain it before crowds stamped crops flat or trampled themselves to death. But the music only fed the fever. You stand beneath a bare tree At the clearing's edge, the frost crunching under your boots. A young woman breaks from the circle skirts, whipping around her legs, eyes glassy, as she clutches your sleeve. Her mouth moves with words you can't catch. Then she laughs, a sharp, startled bark of sound, before spinning back into the writhing mass, as if tugged by invisible strings. A curious detail flickers like candlelight in your mind. In some towns, priests sprinkled dancers with holy water, or tried to herd them into churches to cage the frenzy in stone. But even sanctuary walls couldn't hold the restless feet for long. Scholars still puzzle over these outbreaks. Were they mass hysteria, fungal poisoning from moldy grain, or a desperate dance to feel alive when sickness turned every house into a tomb? You watch as the circle expands, shrinks and reforms, sweaty palms, grasping feet, pounding frozen earth to mud. Faces gleam in the gray dawn, somewhere between agony and joy. Some villagers stand back, arms crossed, tight eyes darting from the dancers to the chapel doors, as if waiting for a sign that the plague might lift once the last step falls. A man stumbles, arms flung wide like a marionette with cut strings. He crashes to his knees, breath rasping from lungs that have given up on keeping pace. Two others pull him up without breaking rhythm, folding him back into the whirl, as if he never fell at all. Researchers continue to argue whether dancing mania cured or cursed those who joined. Some claim the wild motion brought a kind of mercy, flushed fevers, cleared minds, or at least gave desperate souls something to do when prayer and poultices failed. Others see only danger, bodies bruised, bones, broken spirits spent faster than the plague could claim them. You step back from the clearing, your boots sinking into churned earth. The dancers keep spinning, faces turned skyward like moths circling a flame only they can see. Their laughter drifts through the air, sharp and breathless, a reminder that sometimes the fight for life isn't still and silent. It's wild, reckless, and impossibly alive. You pull your cloak tight and turn from the clearing footsteps, swallowed by the steady drumbeat of feet behind you, proof that fear doesn't always crouch in corners. Sometimes it leaps and stomps and dances until dawn. Long after the echo of frantic feet fades into the waking village, you follow the narrow path that cuts behind the chapel and slopes toward the fields. The air is damp here, heavy with the scent of earth and wet hay, but another smell rides the breeze, too sharp, coppery, unmistakably alive. Ahead, a cluster of villagers gathers in a half circle around a rough stone altar. A flicker of movement catches your eye, a struggling bundle clutched tight in a boy's arms. You've stumbled onto another strange bulwark against the plague animal sacrifice. In a world where herbs, frogs, bloodletting, and vinegar failed to keep death from rattling the door, some villagers turn to the oldest bargain of all, a life given so that other lives might be spared. An old man, his cloak muddy, his voice cracked by the cold steps forward to accept the bundle. It's a dog paws tucked close to its belly, eyes wide and confused. He murmurs a few words that blur into the sighing wind words meant to carry this small life's weight onto the sickness that gnaws at the village's edge. Some believe that when the plague spirit comes sniffing, it will find the fresh blood first growing fat on sacrifice instead of human breath. One fact you can carry like a pebble in your pocket. In the worst outbreaks, records whisper of dogs, cats, even birds offered at crossroads or buried at field edges, stand-ins for humans too weary to watch another neighbor vanish under fever's shroud. Some towns outlawed it, calling it pagan or sinful. But when the priest turned his back, villagers still crept out under moonlight to do what needed doing. A curious detail Certain villages marked these animals with chalk or charcoal crosses, tiny painted symbols meant to bind their souls to the pestilence they were meant to carry away. Sometimes, the creatures were left at crossroads where spirits were thought to linger and wander, so the sickness might lose its scent and stray from the hearth. You stand at the edge of the gathering, the wet grass cold under your feet. The old man lifts a crude knife, its handle wrapped in leather that's gone dark with years of rain and sweat. He pauses just long enough to whisper another prayer part, plea, part, apology. The boy turns away, burying his face in his mother's skirts as the dog whines, once soft and puzzled. Some scholars remain divided about these offerings. Were they echoes of forgotten pagan rites, or simply last resorts when all else had failed? Some argue the rituals were meant to shock the village into unity. One small death, witnessed by all, a reminder that surviving together sometimes demanded choices too heavy to carry alone. The knife flashes. Once, then it's done. The villagers stand in silence, heads bowed, the only sound the soft rush of wind through the wet grass. Someone gathers the small body in a burlap cloth, carries it to the edge of the field, and lowers it into a shallow pit where garlic cloves, sage sprigs, and a twist of rough twine lie waiting one final nod to all the other cures woven into this single, desperate act. You step back, the hush pressing close around you. Somewhere overhead, a crow cackles at the dawn wings beating hard against the chill breeze. The villagers drift apart, feet quiet in the dew-soaked earth, eyes downcast, but steps oddly lighter, another layer of fear lifted however briefly by the weight of this traded life. Researchers still puzzle over these sacrifices. Did they calm more hearts than they claimed creatures? Or did they simply remind people that the line between human and beast could blur when survival became a prayer, whispered to the restless wind? You pull your cloak, tighter boots, brushing the grave's fresh earth. The dog's small shape is already hidden by handfuls of soil and herbs. The villagers fade back into the fields and lanes, leaving behind a single silent promise that the plague must now bargain with this sacrifice before it comes knocking again. You leave the field behind the hush of the sacrifice, still pressing at your thoughts like the cold fog curling around your boots. The village feels different now, emptier somehow, as if a piece of its fear lies buried with the small, still shape in the shallow earth. But fear is clever, always finding new doors to slip through, and tonight you stumble upon yet another, the cures so strange, so secretive, that even hope comes whispered behind shuttered windows. You follow a twisting lane toward the edge of town, where a lone cottage squats at the fringe of the woods. A single candle flickers behind a scrap of oiled cloth tacked over the window. Inside, you find a woman bent over a table, cluttered with bundles of dried herbs you don't recognize, twists of stalks bound in red thread, tiny cloth sachets stuffed with powders so fine they drift like dust when she breathes too close. These are the forbidden remedies, plants and powders that promise more than garlic or vinegar ever could yet carry the threat of the noose or the pyre if mixed in the wrong hands. You stand in the doorway as the woman crushes a handful of seeds between stone and wood. She doesn't look up. The hush is thick as old wool, broken only by the low grind of pestle on mortar. A simple fact to press between the pages of your mind, some herbs used to treat the plague, walked a razor's edge between medicine and witchcraft. Mandrake, henbane, wolfsbane plants steeped in old pagan rites whispered about in church pews, but passed hand to hand when the fever crept too close. Some healers swore these plants could draw poison from blood-calm coughing fits or burn fevers down to ash. Others saw them as devil's tools, weeds for witches weaving their hexes under moonlight. A curious detail surviving court records show villagers hauled before judges for growing too much of the wrong leaf. A garden bursting with sage was a blessing. Rows of nightshade hidden behind bramble were another matter entirely. Some accused wise women of slipping poisons into their cures that quieted children's cries forever, or left a rival too weak to claim another day's wages. You watch the woman tip the crushed seeds into a clay pot, mixing them with a pinch of ground root and something sharp and green that smells of bitter almonds. She spoons the powder into tiny linen bundles, tying each with twine dyed with elderberry juice. A single bundle passes into your palm, warm from her touch rough, where the linen's frayed. She doesn't speak a word, only nods toward the door, a silent reminder that what you carry now is both a cure and a crime. Some scholars argue that these forbidden cures hid real knowledge, ancient pharmacology cloaked in superstition. Others insist they were placebos wrapped in folklore magic words and toxic roots that soothed only because they offered hope when the plague offered none. There's no tidy answer, no final verdict etched in the brittle pages of the village records. You tuck the bundle deep inside your cloak as you step back into the night. The woods lean close here, branches brushing your shoulders like gossiping neighbors. Somewhere behind you, the woman snuffs the candle, hiding her secrets in the hush before dawn. In the wider village, rumors of witchcraft cling to the air as thick as smoke. Neighbors watch neighbors' priests mutter warnings, yet still the sick come knocking at the cottage door when garlic and goat fat fail. You press on the forbidden bundle tucked against your ribs like a second heartbeat. The lane winds back toward the warmth of the village fires, but your mind drifts with the chill breeze, wondering how many secrets were buried in gardens no priest ever blessed, how many hands passed powder in the dark, how many cures were lost when fire took the healer, not the plague. And through it all, one truth remains: hope is stubborn and fear is hungry. Both will find roots in the soil, no matter how many times the village tries to dig them up and burn them to ash. The last stars cling to the thinning night as you make your way back toward the village square, the hidden bundle of forbidden herbs pressing against your ribs with each step. Around you, shutters creak open just enough for tired eyes to watch dawn crawl in, as if daylight alone could chase the pestilence from doorsteps and bedsides. But tucked among the ashes of strange cures and half-whispered prayers, you feel it now, something new, something different, taking root in the cracks left by fear. You pause where the lanes meet near the old well, at the heart of the village. Here, a healer stands, with a heavy ledger propped against the well's rim, a charcoal stub scratching down notes by the glow of a lantern. A pile of wilted garlic, used leech jars, scorched bits of sulfur cloth. These old relics lie discarded at his feet, like trophies of a long losing battle. He greets you with a weary nod, tapping the edge of his page. You lean closer, reading the neat rows of inked words records of who was bled, and who survived, who danced until collapse, and who washed their skin raw with vinegar, who tied talismans to bedposts, and who whispered to frogs in the dark. But now there are new lines too, ideas scribbled between the tally marks: quarantine fresh air, clean water, rat catchers. These are the seeds of science, the tiny sprouts breaking through the frozen soil of superstition and ritual. You watch as the healer dips his stub in ink again, sketching rough plans for separate sick rooms notes on burying the dead beyond the village walls instead of under kitchen floors, warnings about flea bites and grain stores that might hide more than mice. A plain fact to rest your weary thoughts on the Black Death shattered more than bodies. It cracked open. Old knowledge forced healers to ask new questions, to trust what they could see over what they were told. In time, these scraps of notes and small experiments would bloom into real medicine, germ theory, sanitation. The first faint steps toward the idea that sickness was not a curse, but something that could be understood, fought, maybe even defeated. A curious detail lingers like the smell of rosemary on your cloak. In some towns, the very people once called witches for brewing forbidden cures became midwives and nurses when the plague's tide turned. Their herbal wisdom, hidden for fear of the gallows, folded into the first manuals for apothecaries and chirurgeons who traded charms for early cures. The healer catches your eye lifting a battered glass vial filled with clear water. No powders, no goat fat, no frogs or talismans, just boiled water sealed tight. He explains how they use it now to wash wounds, to rinse linens, to ease fevers when vinegar fails. There's no chant, no ritual, only the quiet hope that clean hands and clear eyes might keep death at bay, where prayers alone could not. Some scholars still argue about this fragile turning point. Did knowledge triumph over fear? Or did fear simply find a new shape in doctors' coats and medical books? But for you, standing by this well in the hush before full dawn, the ledger feels heavier than any charm you wore or potion you swallowed. It is proof that behind every strange cure lurked a question waiting to bloom into an answer. You slip your hand into your cloak, brushing the forbidden bundle one last time before you drop it into the well's cold water. The healer doesn't stop you. He only nods, scratching another note into his ledger. Around you, the village stirs, awake faces peering out to see if this day might be different, if the plague's shadow might lift at last. You walk away, with your skin still tingling from garlic and vinegar, your memories stitched together with frogs, flames, charms, and sacrifice. But under it all, a new thought settles like warm earth around a seed. Sometimes, the strangest cures are the ones that lead us back to reason, to knowledge, to the simple, stubborn will to survive. The sun rises slow and pale, brushing warmth onto rooftops still slick with dew and night fears. In the hush of your room, you slip under your blanket, carrying with you the echoes of medieval gardens, the sharp sting of vinegar, the soft tug of a leech, the uneasy comfort of charms pressed to your chest. You drift through the village once more in your mind, past the burning herbs, the barefoot penitents, the circle of dancers stomping the frost to mud. You watch the healer at his ledger, see the sparks of science flicker to life, where fear once ruled alone. Breathe deep now. Let the soft rustle of linen, the far-off cry of a morning rooster, and the imagined hush of old pages turning guide you into sleep. The plague is gone here in this quiet place, between waking and dreaming. There is only the steady hum of questions asked and answered, strange cures traded for clearer eyes and cleaner hands. If you'd like to wander these forgotten roads again, you know where to find me, quietly waiting with another page turned back. But for now, close your eyes, loosen your grip on the old world's shadows, and let this sleepy voice fade with the candle's last flicker.